The Ware Auditorium on the corner of Washington and 4th Street has been a hub of the Northfield entertainment scene for more than a century. Now known as the Grand Event Center, it began its long life in 1899, built by A.K. Ware, who had just moved to Northfield. Ware served as mayor from 1902 to 1905 and was the main stockholder in the Northfield Light, Heat and Power Plant. But his most tangible contribution to the town was building a grand opera house. Northfield's first permanent opera house was an unassuming hall above Lockwood's shoe store on Division Street, though there were surely temporary and makeshift halls before Lockwood's. Since 1872, it had served as a center for civic engagement, social interaction, and artistic expression in Northfield. By 1892, however, people were beginning to feel the need for something better and grander. As one local gentleman wrote in the Northfield News, "The house now in use is uncomfortable for public gatherings, and the man who occupies one of the wooden chairs for 2 hours during an evening generally promises himself that he will not undergo the torture very soon again." Reluctant patrons were not the only problem with Lockwood's. Traveling theater troupes and lecturers, staples of entertainment and a community's window to the outside world during this era, were increasingly bypassing Northfield because of the poor facilities. Northfield and its colleges deserved a first-class opera house, declared Ware, when he announced his intent to build a new facility in 1899. Public response was so favorable that he scrapped his original plans in favor of a more elaborate building, doubling the cost of the project. In all, the auditorium cost more than $20,000. Ware pledged between $4,000 and $5,000 to the project, but ended up paying about $8,000. Designed by Minneapolis architect Harry Carter, the building was built with red brick in the Federal Revival style. On the front, facing Washington Street, is a large Palladian window. It was centered above a portico that was later removed. The south side of the building, the side facing 4th Street, had a small smoking balcony. Inside there was orchestra seating on the floor, a balcony with gallery seating behind it, 2 first-floor proscenium boxes, and 2 balcony boxes. In all, the auditorium had seating for nearly 800. There was also a ladies' retiring room at the front of the building. The auditorium opened on the day after Christmas in 1899 with a traveling troupe presenting The Red Cockade, a romantic comedy set during the French Revolution. In the audience for the grand occasion were some other travelers, too, people from Minneapolis and St. Paul, who came by train for the evening show. It was a grand opening. Ware spoke briefly following the second act, complimenting those who had participated in the construction of the building. The play's leading actor, Walker Whiteside, praised the accommodations, and the Northfield News assessed the acoustics as highly satisfactory. In mid-April 1890, just 4 months after it opened, the building was gutted by fire. The Northfield News reported the next day, "The building presented a sorry sight to the crowds of spectators who gathered. The south end of the foyer and parquet circle are completely destroyed, the floor and stringers being completely consumed. The whole of the interior is smokened and blackened. The plaster has fallen, and the opera chairs, burned, warped, and blistered, are a total loss." Fortunately, the damages were covered by insurance, and the auditorium was rebuilt. It reopened 2 months later to a production of Verdi's opera Il Trovatore. In 1910, Ware put the building up for sale, saying it had become a financial strain to operate. He asked for $12,000, or just slightly more than half of its original cost. When no buyers came forward, he closed the auditorium. In defense of his actions, he told a newspaper, "The fact remains that I have not received 1 cent of income from it for 1 year now, although it has cost me nearly $700 to maintain it." He was the first, but not the last, to find it difficult to make a living operating the facility. He moved out of Northfield soon after he closed it. A group of Northfield citizens purchased the auditorium in 1912, and it served a final short stint as an opera house until Everett Dilley bought the building in 1917. He reopened it as the Grand Theatre, a place where, for 10 cents a ticket, Northfielders could watch silent films accompanied by a 5-piece orchestra. The Grand was the largest and most elaborate of several silent movie theaters in Northfield during this time. Another, called the Gem, was located next door to the Ames Mill on the west side of Water Street and across the street from the State Bank. It was likely no more than a large room with chairs and bleachers. Dilley owned the theatre until 1927, closing it only once, briefly, when the 1918 flu epidemic hit Northfield. The new owners moved the entrance to 4th Street and added an electric sign. 2 years later, in 1929, they installed the equipment needed to show talkies. In August of the same year, they announced that the theatre was to receive a prestigious visitor. Leo, the lion who roared at the beginning of MGM's films, made an exciting Saturday afternoon appearance. He traveled to the theatre in the most magnificent and palatial vehicle ever designed for any animal. Dilley repurchased the Grand in 1933. It was one of 2 movie theaters he owned in town. The Grand showed the A pictures, and the West, located 2 blocks north of the Ames Mill on the west side of the river, showed B movies and serials. In a practice known as the studio system, large movie studios required theater owners like Dilley to buy a package of movies featuring big-name stars, the A movies, as well as B movies with lesser-known stars and sometimes racy subjects. The West and many other commercial buildings on the west side of the river were demolished when Highway 3 was constructed in the 1950s. Dilley sold the Grand after World War II to Irvin D. Dinger Olson, a St. Olaf graduate who updated the theater screen and projectors. The theater changed hands several times in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, as small-town theaters were becoming increasingly challenging to operate. They were limited in what they could show because large suburban theaters got first crack at new releases. In 1985, in an effort to stay competitive, owner Tom Doughty shuttered the Grand when he built a new 3-screen theater south on Highway 3 in Northfield. In 2009, that building was converted to a Culver's restaurant, leaving Northfield without a movie theater for the first time in more than 90 years. For a time, the Grand was threatened with demolition, but in 1989, 2 Carleton graduates turned it into a restaurant, only to close a year later. A second restaurant closed in 1993. The building got a new lease on life and re-established its place in the local entertainment scene in 1997, when new owners installed a large wooden floor to accommodate dancing and converted it to the Grand Event Center. It now hosts receptions, reunions, parties, concerts, and community meetings.